Welcome to Clear Creek Community Church Online. My name is Carl Garcia and I'm the campus pastor at our Clear Lake campus. Clear Creek is made up of multiple campuses located throughout the Bay Area of Houston. And while we're so glad that you joined us to watch the sermon today, you should know that we believe that life is better when we do it together. When we gather as a church, it's a non-downloadable experience. Singing together, praying together, serving together, those are all things that just don't translate online. But they're essential to the entire experience of becoming a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. So I would encourage you, make plans to check out the campus nearest you and see what worshiping and living in community is really all about. You can visit us at clearcreek.org to find out information about our locations, our service times, and so much more. We hope to see you soon.
So as we start, let me give you some compelling reasons why we focus on the fact that marriage matters. Marriage matters because the quality of your marriage dramatically impacts the quality of your life, right? Everything else being going great, marriage is going bad, everything's bad. So marriage matters. It matters because it really impacts your children. No matter what your marriage is like, your kids are going to carry that marriage experience into their lives. It's all that they know that defines marriage in this world. And so they will be talking about your marriage on the counselor's couch in 30 years, whenever, right? It matters because marriage is the hinge pin of society. What I'm saying is that so much in all of society just kind of turns on the health of marriages in a culture. I mean, you just look at the statistics, just the research, it's consistent. It all indicates that people who are a married, healthily married couple, they're more healthy, they're more financially stable, their kids have a greater tendency to thrive in the world. All of these things really turn on the health of marriages. And marriage is really prominent in our understanding of what it means to have a relationship with God. And that's what this series is built on. It's built on the understanding that the Bible has much to say about marriage, both in the beginning of the Bible and the end of the Bible, and some passages all the way through, picturing our relationship with God with the language of marriage. And so, I realize as I start this today, I'm talking to many who have been through painful, bad marriage experiences. And I know that some are looking at this and thinking, I'm a single person, I don't know if I'm ever going to get married. So let me just talk to you for a second. I hope you'll stay in for this series. And let me give you a few reasons. I think that it's important because maybe you'll be married someday. And even if you think no, well then you'll have friends who are married. And you'll know what they're complaining about, right? No, I mean, you can be an encouraging voice to them as we walk together in this life because marriage is such an important thing. So let's look into what the scriptures say and then walk as a community of people who want to live into the beauty of all of that. And if nothing else, we walk out with a greater sense of hope for what marriage is about. Susan and I have been married for 40 years now. That's just mind-boggling to me. And that, well, you're kind to do that. That just means we've been out of the dating game for a really long time. And I'm glad because it's kind of a wild world out there, evidently, especially with all of the, the apps that you can use and the different websites that you can use to try to find that special someone to spend your life with. And some people's bios on those dating apps, well, to say the least, they're unrealistic, oddly specific. I'm going to share one with you. Like if you were to search worst dating app bios, this one would come up. So this guy starts out, what I'm looking for in my woman. Not a very good start, is it? Long hair, nice feet with straight toes. No hammer toes for this guy. Kind, that should make the list. Always responds to my messages fast. And then the next one, get this. Does not get mad when I take long to reply. Can cook me a good breakfast. Has their own house, a nice car, a good job, a good credit score. Wears makeup when I see her. Yeah. Lets me make decisions. Says she loves me every day. Does not look at other guys. Bilingual. I don't care what 2 languages, at least she speaks 2, right? Just bilingual. Good at cleaning, good dancer, likes the NBA. I don't like the NBA. Uses air freshener in the bathroom. Listen, I left a lot of the really inappropriate things off of here too, that this guy said, but I risked that one. And finally, not vain. So, any takers, ladies? Because I'm sure this guy's still available. Now, we know that's ridiculous. And by the way, if you don't think that's ridiculous, you should not pass go and collect $200. Just go straight to a counselor and get some help, because that's ridiculous, right? It's kind of funny, but it's really sad. And it's sad because it pictures how a lot of people think about relationships in our culture. So I'm going to recommend a book to you. It's called The Meaning of Marriage by Dr. Tim Keller. I think it's one of the finer books that really helps apply the gospel to what marriage is all about. And in this book, Tim Keller uses this egghead phrase to describe cultural relationships today. The irony of pessimistic idealism. That's what he says relationships are like today. They're filled with the irony of pessimistic idealism, which means he thinks that people just have a real high ideal for themselves, and they impose that on the person that they want to spend their life with, and it becomes an unrealistic kind of expectation. And when these people get together, they begin to realize that really that other person isn't measuring up to what their ideal is, and so they become pessimistic about the relationship and just about marriage in general. It just confirms what people have felt really from the start these days, because very few people have a positive, thriving image of what marriage is all about. Maybe because of the marriage they saw in their parents or their friends, or maybe in the movies, or they experienced themselves. And so here's the suspicion that people carry. You can feel it in the room. The suspicion is that marriages are doomed to fail eventually. That's just a cultural point of view. They may not last. For most, they probably won't last. It's going to fail eventually. And you can see it in the statistics these days. Let me give you a few. These are statistics in my lifetime. I know I'm a little old, but in my lifetime, all this happened, right? 72% of adults in America were married when I was born, and today 45%. One factor driving this drop is people put off marriage till later. The average man marries at 30 years and 4 months. Average woman, 28 years and 6 months. The divorce rate is nearly twice the rate it was in 1960. 60% of adults have lived with an unmarried partner at some point, which is the highest on record. And all this kind of points to just the pessimism about marriage. So I was talking with some of our pastors this last week. We're talking about conversations that we've had with people who felt like they've been hurt in a marriage relationship, their parents or their own. And it's like they tell these stories of how marriage is just this train wreck waiting to happen. And that you don't want to be near when that train goes off the rails, because the collateral damage is so dramatic that you just want to stay away from it as much as you can. And those conversations are so prevalent that it kind of comes to the point where people seem to think that marriage itself is this civil, legal, unnecessary construct that eventually is going to lead to pain. So why would you do it anyway? Is that what we are to believe? And of course, we're in a Christian church on a Sunday, and we say, no, we don't believe that. We have hope. But where do you find hope for a thriving marriage? Well, you're not going to find it in the idealistic expectations around us or in trying to fix your spouse to make her or him the perfect person. You're not going to find it in the cultural blogs or books, because let's just face it, our culture hasn't done so well in this area. But we're going to look to the scriptures and see what God's plan is for marriage. That's what we want to give some energy to today. And my hope is for us that we can see in the Bible both a picture for marriage that will give us hope and a pathway to experience marriage that will be a thriving marriage that gives us hope. So let's jump into it right away. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 31, part of what Chris read earlier, says this: "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So the Apostle Paul, writing the church at Ephesus, quotes Genesis 2:24. It goes way back to creation, where God brings the first bride and groom together, and he oversees that first wedding, and he talks about how these two people, they're going to leave their home of origin, they're going to form a new home, they're going to have this incredible relationship where there is oneness as they establish this new family together. He doesn't quote the very next verse. It just simply says, "And the man and the woman, they were both naked and they felt no shame." Naked and felt no shame. When I teach about what is the purpose of marriage, the purpose of marriage is intimacy. And it's seen in this phrase, naked and felt no shame. Naked means that they're completely known. And felt no shame, they're unconditionally accepted. To be completely known and to be unconditionally accepted. This is God's design for the marriage relationship. And so, in that context then, the Apostle Paul says, there's this profound mystery. Now, the mystery that we see here, but by the way, when we think about mystery, we think mystery is something that's just hard to understand, maybe difficult to understand in, science or whatever. But when the Bible talks about mystery, the mystery is something that was previously hidden, but now revealed. Previously hidden, now revealed. So he says there's this profound mystery. And interestingly, the word profound is the word in the original language, mega. We get that word, right? So this is a mega mystery. And the mega mystery isn't that two people can become one, it's how two people become one. The mega mystery in marriage is the union of a husband and a wife. This is the picture of a thriving marriage. It is the union of a husband and a wife that is like the union between Christ and his church. I wish I could have set that up in a way that you could just feel the mic drop. Because this is really a profound thing. That marriage finds its best picture in the fact that Jesus made a way for union with his church. Now, to understand that completely, we have to understand the essence of the gospel. So let me just state the basic teaching of the whole Bible very simply, and it's this. God made us for himself. We're made for a relationship with God. Our sin separates us from God, but out of his love, God acts on our behalf by sending Jesus. Jesus comes and he lavishes his love on us even though we don't love him back. Even though we leave him out. He lavishes love on us. He extends grace to us, something we don't deserve. And because of his sacrificial love for us that ultimately took him to the cross, he pays for our wrongdoing, and he makes a way for us to be reconciled to God and to experience the purpose that God had for us from the very beginning. This is the gospel. That through faith and not our good works, we can be made right with God and made one with God. Now, understanding that gives us an understanding into a real picture of what a thriving marriage should look like. Because a thriving marriage isn't based on all the bad, hopeless pictures that we see in our culture. It's based on this picture of what we see Jesus doing for us on the cross. That Jesus, gracious, sacrificial love for us is the kind of love that makes a man and a woman one and allows them to live in a thriving relationship together. Now, if that sounds just a little too churchy for you, a little too religious for you, and I can't get my head wrapped around that, hang in here, because it's a Polaroid picture. It's going to take a little time to get clear. And it's going to become more clear, I think, when I talk about the pathway to how you have a thriving marriage. The pathway to a thriving marriage. So here's how that pathway starts. We bring into our marriage relationship ourselves. And that's a good thing, but it's not all good. Because we bring with us all this baggage from our family of origin. Did you have any baggage in your family of origin? And maybe you bring these unhealthy patterns of communication. Y'all were yellers, or people who wouldn't talk, or never talked about anything important, or whatever it was. You bring all this baggage and your communication patterns. You bring your annoying habits. You bring your stubborn insistence that there's only one way to rightly load the dishwasher, You bring all these scars of being wounded by other people. And so, let's just face it. A man and a woman stand at the altar, and she's a mess. And he's a mess. And two people that are a mess are going to bring their messes together, and it's supposed to be all wonderful, right? I mean, this is a recipe for failure. But this should not discourage us, because you got to know that all of the best marriages in the history of the world started just like that. So it should not discourage us, but it should make clear what is the very first step on the pathway to a thriving marriage. And the first step is we have to address the real enemy in the marriage. The real enemy is not your spouse, even if it might feel that way today. The real enemy is not your job. It is your own sin and brokenness. We all bring it. We bring it into the relationship. In this book I referred to earlier, Tim Keller makes this simple observation about how people get married to this wonderful person and everything's supposed to be great. And then maybe a few months or a few years down the road, they have a predictable experience. Three things happen. First, you begin to find out how selfish that wonderful person really is. Do you remember when that happened for you? I mean, they're wonderful, but all of a sudden they're like, wow, really? And then the second thing that happens is that you discover that they are having the same experience that you are having. That you, the wonderful person that she thought was so wonderful, she's finding to be so selfish and telling you about it now. And the third thing is that you acknowledge that, at least in part, you are selfish, but you conclude that his selfishness or her selfishness is really worse than yours for the marriage. It's just kind of the common experience, right? Here's the truth. We're blind to our own sin. We don't even know the impact of our own brokenness. But then we get married, and marriage is this 24/7 mirror so that we can't ignore ourselves anymore. Because they just keep showing us how many ways we can be broken. And we could focus on all of their problems if we wanted to, but that's never going to heal anything in us. What we've got to learn to do is really address the real problem. And the real problem, my sin and brokenness, is not something I can fix. It's not something I can unwind. So it's where I come to Jesus, where I find grace and forgiveness and healing and hope. It's the beginning place. If you look in the Bible, it's the beginning place for a thriving marriage. So, which leads us to the second part of the pathway, is you have to learn to die to yourself. Learn to die to yourself. To lay down your life, to lay down your preferences, to lay down your way of doing things so that you can serve him or serve her in the marriage. So when Paul says that marriage is modeled after Christ in the church, that's precisely what he means, because this is what Jesus did. Jesus laid down his life. So just a few verses before the one I read a moment ago is Ephesians 5:25. It's where we started in the reading that Chris gave. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Gave himself up for her. That last phrase is not separate from loving the church. It's how Jesus loved the church. Giving ourselves up for our spouse is not different than loving them. It's how we love them. That's what he describes for us. We give ourselves up. We lay our life down. We die to ourselves. We sacrificially love. And so, here's the good news. For a lifetime of marriage, you get to wake up every day and die to yourself all over again. And you might be thinking, well, what about her? What about him? I mean, are they going to be dying to themselves too? Because okay, I'll do that, but they better be doing their part as well. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting with a couple who's struggling, and this is the conversation. Well, wait, what about her? What about him? Laying themselves down, giving themselves up. And it becomes this standoff. Who's going to serve whom first? Who's going to really love the other person first? And a standoff, when you're in a standoff, you need to know, standoff never gets fixed by a trade-off. A standoff doesn't get fixed by a trade-off, meaning, okay, I'll serve you this time and you serve me next time. Or I'll give it your way this time, but next time it's my turn to get my way. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, that just devolves into this tit for tat for the rest of your life. Instead, what Jesus shows us is what Paul Miller in his book, The J Curve, shows as a way of life. Let me explain. So picture this, just a simple J, big J. This simple J, I'm starting at the short part here, the simple J, and he says, this is the picture of Jesus' life. Jesus always was serving, dying to himself, doing what was good for the other. And in his life of downward mobility, a servant's heart, he was giving up of himself. That's what the cross was about. The cross of Jesus was about Jesus doing for us what we could not do. And when Jesus did that, though, out of the goodness of his love, the Father turns the work of Jesus to give himself up as this beautiful resurrection of life. And a resurrection of life that creates more life than we could ever create if we were just trading tit for tat how to serve each other. So the way to die to ourselves is to believe deep down that the way of Jesus is true, meaning we serve the other, we give of ourselves, knowing that out of the goodness of God, he gives a kind of life and fulfillment that we can't create. So dying to ourselves is a prerequisite to ever having the resurrection kind of experience in our life with God and in our life in a marriage as well. So that's step 2. Die to yourself. Do so believing that just in the J curve, there's a resurrection, there's a fullness that only God can give. And then the third step, show love and respect to your spouse. Show love and respect. Ephesians 5:33. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself. Keep that in mind, as himself. And let the wife see that she respect her husband. So, husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. Now, does that mean that wives don't need to love their husbands and husbands don't need to respect their wives? No. I mean, the best way to understand this is that really, men feel most loved when they're respected, and women feel most respected when they're loved. So we're just different. And so there's an emphasis that's different here. Men feel loved when they're respected. Women feel respected when they're loved. But notice how he says that the husband is to love his wife. He says he's to love the wife as himself. So this is the real key to learning how to show love and respect. As himself. I want to use this language. And it's almost too benign. It's too simple, but it's not. If you'll just think with me for a second. Here's how we do that. You have to pay attention. That's all he's talking about. Pay attention. I can promise you, I always pay attention to me. If I'm hungry, I know it. If I'm sleepy, I know it. If I'm angry, I know it. If I'm in a bad mood, I know it. And if I'm home with my wife and I'm amorous, I know it. And what he's saying is, you know yourself. You pay attention to yourself. So treat her that way. Will you're always watching. You're noticing, you're paying attention. And in the same way, she's paying attention to you. There's no greater love than this sense that no matter what's going on in your life, they're looking, they're watching, they're paying attention. They're hoping to know you more like that. So years ago, I preached the Christmas Eve service, and after the service, a man came to the front of the stage. It's very similar to a setting like this. He came here, and this is kind of awkward. You know, I'm kind of trying to listen to him because the band was playing loud music and everything, and he was a guest, and so I was just getting to meet him, and he said, recently we celebrated 50 years of marriage. And I said, that is wonderful. And he said, do you want to know the secret to being married 50 years? If anyone says that to you, always say yes. Seriously. I mean, 50 years, that's incredible. So I said, of course I want to know that. And what he said was so profound, I've told this story over and over again for probably 25 years. He said this. He said, we've discovered that the definition of love in a marriage is constant mutual awareness. Constant mutual awareness. No matter what I'm doing, where I am paying attention to what's going on with her. And she is paying attention to what's going on with me. This kind of constant mutual awareness creates for you an upward spiral of intimacy. You think about it. The more you show respect to him, the more he's just moving into showing love for you. And the more you feel loved by him, the more you show respect to him. As you're constantly paying attention to each other, there is this upward spiral. It's horribly affected if we have a standoff and say, no, it's your turn, not my turn to serve. Because that's never the question in this upward spiral of constant mutual awareness. It's a way of loving and serving each other. And it brings a kind of fulfillment that only a mutual sacrifice can bring. So, we live in a culture that has very unhealthy pictures of what marriage really looks like. And we need a good picture. Some of us have been wounded so deeply, we doubt so much about marriage, we need a picture of what married love can look like. And that picture is Jesus' sacrificial love for his church. God, the God of the Bible, points at that and says, think about that, Jesus' sacrificial love for his church, when you think about the love between a husband and a wife. This is the picture of marriage, and no other picture will do. No other picture will be grand enough to actually bring about life change in people's relationship. Because every other picture will devolve into just getting what I want and you get what you want, and we hope that it works out together. But when you know what it means to be completely loved by God, and for him to have done for you something that you can't do, and that's what he did for us in Christ. For him to give freely to us a kind of love that we can never earn or deserve. Once you've tasted that, all of a sudden you begin to think, that's what real love is like. And that's the kind of love that I want to show to others. And definitely the kind of love that I want to show to my spouse. The most important step in the mystery of marriage is to receive the love of Jesus. When you receive it, now you have a sense of what it might look like to give it. And as you continue to receive it, the more you want to give it. Love your spouse like that. Follow the pathway. For some of us, that means we begin by addressing the biggest enemy, which is our own sin and brokenness. If you haven't done that, I hope you'll do that. I hope for your sake, I hope for marriage's sake, I hope for your kids' sake, you'll address that biggest enemy, and Jesus is the one to address it with. And then learn to die to yourself. Learn to show love and respect to one another. To pay attention. And when you're paying attention, don't call attention to the fact you're paying attention. You see how I was paying attention there? No, this is just a lifelong journey. I just pay attention and serve. I pay attention and serve. And I trust deep down that the J curve comes into play. That my laying my life down is going to bring a resurrection life that's greater than anything I could create on my own. It's counterintuitive. This self-sacrificing love brings a deep kind of happiness and fulfillment and joy that we can never create ourselves. And that's the mystery of marriage. I want to ask our band to come out, and I want to invite you to bow your heads with me, and let's take this before the Lord. I want to give you a moment just to talk to God yourself in the silence of your own mind, maybe just to say, Lord, I want the mystery of marriage at work in me, and the marriage I have right now. I pray that you would give me this picture of what sacrificial love looks like so that I can experience it from you and show it toward my spouse. If you're to offer before God the thing you need to work on in the 3 steps that we talked about, what do you want to offer to him now? The fact that you need to address some enemy, or the biggest enemy in your marriage, which is your own sin and brokenness, or maybe that you want to commit to serving your spouse by dying to yourself, or maybe to show respect or sacrificial love by paying attention. Would you just offer that to the Lord now? The first and most important step is to say, Jesus, I need you. I need the love that you alone can give. I receive you. I'll follow you all the days of my life. Father, I pray for marriages all across our church, that we would grow deep into this mystery of oneness and union because of the kind of love that you've shown us in Jesus. I pray you'd give hope to couples who are struggling, and maybe they've struggled for a long time. Give them hope that your kind of love heals and restores because it changes us from the inside out. And I pray that, Father, for those who have not seen a good picture of marriage, that they'd have a greater clarity and understanding of your goodness through the grace of Jesus toward us, and get a picture of what marital love can look like. And so we offer to you our lives, and in these coming days as we continue in this series, I pray you continue to grow us in our marriages as well. And I pray it in the name of Jesus. Amen.